Hi, I'm John with Orange Modworks, and in this video I'm going to go over some install tips for the Raider Massacre kit and how to get a smoother prime out of your kit. Some of the earlier shipped Massacre kits did not have an O-ring spacer in the plunger, and you may notice during prime you have inconsistencies, like if you prime too slowly it won't lock back and requires a sharper prime in order to lock it back. What you are going for is a more user-friendly prime. Like this one has a Massacre with 6 kg spring and a pad in the plunger, and that gives you a little bit more priming distance. So even when you prime slowly, it locks back more consistently, just like that. And so let's take a look inside. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is take all the screws out. I've already done that, and set those aside. After that, separate the two halves of your shell. Raiders like to stick up at the front and in this area, so if you have to, take a small flathead screwdriver and gently pry around the seams to separate your shells, or the two halves of your shell. Okay, now you may notice some similarities between the Raider and the Alpha Trooper in how they prime, but the Raider does not have the same problem as the Alpha Trooper, where this metal priming bar flexes and doesn't get you a long enough prime. So even without the padding, you can prime consistently as long as you have a sharp, quick prime. But in the heat of battle, that's not always going to happen, and the last thing you want is a half prime, which then forces you to reprime, mashing whatever dart was there, and it gives you a pretty nasty jam. So to avoid that, you're going to want to add a little bit of padding into your plunger if you don't have one already. A few of our early shipments were not shipped with padding in the plunger. So to do that, the best padding is an O-ring. It's just the right thickness to not cause problems with your magazines by forcing everything to sit too far forward during the prime. And if you don't have an extra one of our O-rings lying around, the stock O-ring from your original internals works great. So let's get to the plunger tube. Okay. And like the Alpha Trooper, there's a radius on the inside of the plunger which prevents the breech from touching this area. The impact from the plunger hitting the breech is absorbed by the side walls, not the back. And because that radius is there, an O-ring will sit perfectly right on there, without the need for glue or anything. It just sits in the back and it won't come out. And that's it for padding the plunger. If you do not have an O-ring and for whatever reason do not have access to one, be careful you don't use too thick of a pad. If you don't have O-rings, you can use furniture pads, felt pads, anything, because you're not really giving an impact absorbing padding. You're simply giving the plunger more space, or giving the breech more priming distance to engage the trigger catch. And unlike the Alpha Trooper, when you miss a prime, it does not actually warp to one side, because the Raider's bolt sled is much more rigid than any of the other stock bolt sleds out there, or even the polycarbonate, just because it's so crazy thick. It does not warp or bend much anywhere. It's very, very strong. So what ends up happening is, during your prime, your plunger whacks the trigger catch, and the trigger catch moves up so it feels like you've primed. And then when you start bringing the priming handle forward, the plunger and spring goes with it. Because what happened is, the top edge of the plunger did not actually get behind the trigger catch. It was simply pushing up on it. So once you have the padding in place, that should solve that problem. Another thing with the Raider, you don't really need epoxy reinforcement like with the Alpha Trooper, because while the priming handle does move up and down, it doesn't move up and down while it's installed. And because everything is in line, it doesn't flex straight back. From here to here, you'll have almost no flex. There will be a tiny bit of flex up in this curved portion, but the way it sits in the shell, it's protected from doing that. Any flex you experience will just be extremely minor, and it will happen right here. So for the most part, you'll get a full prime every time with the Raider. Just something to look out for with this: when you install your priming handle, just make sure the screw is tightened down all the way. And you can use your stock screw. These screws are higher quality than Alpha Trooper bolt sled screws, so don't worry about stripping them out. But having a properly sized screwdriver always helps. Alright, so now I need to reinstall the internals. And this is where people run into problems. The two wings on the Raider plunger, these pieces here, need to be underneath these orange rails. And it's pretty easy to have one side up. And your blaster will actually assemble in most cases when the plunger is not properly seated. It just won't function. And you'll have to take it all down and reinstall that part. And it should be very smooth. It's like zero resistance. You can do some test primes. Okay, and once the plunger is in place, get those two silver screws and tighten everything down. And you can go from there. Some things to watch out for with the Raider is we've had some reports of the nose portion of the Raider breech gouging darts that are reinforced with straws. So if you have straw reinforcements in your darts, watch out for that. But that shouldn't affect most people who are using stock streamlines for like HVZ and stuff like that. Okay, then the trigger catch spring and trigger catch. Do not forget your slam fire / trigger actuation bar, the trigger connector, and your trigger. Something to look out for here during install: make sure this little hook is in front of the bolt sled. This is another area where if it's behind, you can still assemble the blaster, it just won't function properly. So it should look like this. It's kind of hard to see with the blue on blue. And your trigger. And before we put the spring in, let's make sure it locks back. That's pretty good. There we go. And for function checks, it's always a good idea to use your stock spring as a test spring, because it's much easier to prime, and that'll let you know that all your parts are working correctly. Okay, so I'm going to pause it and put all the screws back in. Okay, we have most of the screws in to hold the shell together. And a lot of times I get emails about someone will write in and say they can't get their blaster to prime, or it locks up, or they prime and the trigger releases, the trigger catch releases when they don't want it to. And I always say to test with the stock spring without taking everything apart, because sometimes it's the spring that's causing you problems. You know, it could just be twisted or out of place or canted off to one side. And instead of having to take out all 20-something screws, you can just remove the back cap and pull the old spring out and take a stock spring and just install it straight through the back, like that. And you don't even need the cap for the stock spring. And then from here you can test your prime, just to make sure everything's in place. And there you go. And I would especially encourage you to do this with the Raider in particular, because there's a lot of things that can go wrong when you are assembling this blaster with the plunger not sitting in rails and whatnot. And then from there, you just pull it apart gently until the spring is exposed and lift it straight out. What helps is you can remove maybe like these two screws and maybe this one, just enough to split the plastic open a tiny bit. And from there, same thing with the 6 kg. And when you install the 6 kg spring this way, I find there's a lot less of a chance that something will go wrong. But it's a little tricky. There. And we'll sort of screw in. There. Making sure it's not, in fact, twisted. Okay, there you go. And before you put the cap on, don't prime it all the way, because you run the risk of the spring shooting out. Just make sure the plunger moves, because the plunger comes out this far, you know the spring is not in its way. Alright, from there, put the back cap on. Should be good to go. And let's test it. Yep. Normally it's pretty difficult to prime while just holding it in front of you, but that little bit of extra space makes a big difference. I don't really want to dry fire, so... Okay, and another thing with the Raider I noticed in particular is that you cannot deprime it like with the Recon. You can't hold the grip back and pull the trigger and then let it, ease forward. But what you can do is grip it here, and right here where the trigger catch is, you can smack it and it will disengage the trigger catch, and then you can ease everything forward. Just make sure you don't pinch your fingers in the process. Just like that, and then let it come forward, and you've deprimed it without dry firing. Just a little tip. But when you do that, make sure jam door is closed and your fingers are nowhere near here, because it could come slamming forward. Alright, so I hope this solved some of the priming problems you guys have been having with the Raider. And, well, good luck with your kits. Thanks for watching.